Darlene. Darlene.
Yes.
Stop talking.
Sorry. Wow. They're getting started.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the May 22nd, 2019 Santa Clara, Santa Cruz County's Airport Community Roundtable. I'm Steve Alverson with Environmental Science Associates, also known as ESA. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the facilitator of this roundtable. One of my roles is to make sure and be respectful of everyone's time and to keep the roundtable discussions on topic and within the time allotted on the meeting agenda. I will also insist that member discussions and input from the public be respectful to each other and to our colleagues from the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA. The roundtable provides a collaborative forum within which aircraft noise concerns can be discussed and recommendations can be forwarded to the FAA and others for their consideration. This collaboration will be most productive in a collegial and respectful environment. You will note that there is a public comment period on the agenda, which is intended to provide the public an opportunity to share their concerns with the roundtable members for their consideration. Due to the Brown Act, the roundtable is unable to take action at this meeting on the items raised during that public comment period. In addition, in considerations of everyone's time, please limit your comments during that public comment period to 2 minutes or less. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of these yellow speaker forms and provide it to Chairperson Bernal, sitting next to me on my right. And depending on the number of speakers, the chair may reduce the amount of time each speaker has in order to stay on schedule. For example, we've allocated 10 minutes for the public comment period. So if we have 10 speakers, then each speaker would be given a minute of time. So we thank you all in advance for following that guidance. And with that, Madam Chair, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone today. I will let you know before I call order that you can, if you have devices, check in on the Santa Clara City website, and it's just it's SCS, yes, public, and you just agree to their terms, give your life away, and you're set to go. I am going to call roll as is prescribed. I'm going to go from this end. Perhaps we'll have a couple people join us before, although Ed Botteroff has told me that he will be late to the meeting today. So, Kathy Watanabe, if you would introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathy Watanabe from the City of Santa Clara, and welcome to the City of Santa Clara today.
Carlos Palacios, I'm the County Administrative Officer for Santa Cruz County.
Lisa Matichak, Mayor of Mountain View, good to be here in Santa Clara.
Mary Lynn Bernal, City of Saratoga Council Member, Chair.
Liz Lawler, Mayor Pro Tem Monteserino.
My name is Glenn Hendricks, of Sunnyvale City Council Member.
Steve Preminger, representing the County of Santa Clara, who has to leave early today.
Anita Enander, Los Altos City Council Member.
Lydia Cruz, City of Palo Alto Council Member.
Hello, Lydia.
Hello. I know.
Well, you have to stay there for now. So you know, the seats were assigned because we had a request from the City of Santa Clara so that while taping us, they know where we are. And Steve, you are here today too, yes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I identified myself when we started, so I didn't feel the need to do so again. But yes, I am here today.
And I think today we have a few new players. Tom, if you would introduce yourself, please.
Than McLeod.
Than.
I'm from Hawaii, Oakland District. I'm Procedures and Airspace Manager for the district.
Fabi Garcia, Office of the Regional Administrator, Western Pacific.
Bert Ganung, San Francisco International Airport Aircraft Noise Abatement Office.
And I'm Tom Pike from Congressman Ro Khanna's office.
Thank you very much for joining us. And Than, I have messed your name up for over a year now, and I apologize when I was calling in and didn't have the name and the face connected. So welcome today. We now are at item number 3, the presentation on the South Flow Ad Hoc Committee process. And Glenn, take it away.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Hendricks, as I said, from Sunnyvale. I think I was asked to go ahead and go over the ad hoc committee. I was the chairperson of the ad hoc committee, and I just want to give a little bit of history of what we went through there. And mostly this is, I think, setting the table for maybe at next meeting or when that we're going to be able to talk about one of the deliverables that came out of the ad hoc committee. So I think everybody's aware there's been some concerns from people about air noise here in the South Bay for a while. And one of the first things that was created back in April of 2016 was the Select Committee on South Flow Arrivals. It was really kind of more of a mid-peninsula type entity that went on. I attended a couple meetings, but I was not a member of it. But I just want to go ahead and say it happened in April. They concluded their work in 2016. I think even some of the deliverable information is attached in our minutes today. And again, that sets a little bit of the table setting of what is happening that gets us to where we are today. Following that, there were additional concerns that were raised, specifically more in the South Bay as it related to San Jose, South Flow, Surf Air, and some of those things. And through a series of processes and things that occurred, the San Jose City Council authorized the creation of the ad hoc committee, which really was opened up to a representative from all cities within the county, Santa Clara County. And our first meeting was held, looks like November 17th of what went on through May. It was specifically set up that it had a defined time limit, that it could only exist for 6 months. And the purpose of what it was to engage with the FAA. I want to thank the FAA. They had fantastic, I think, engagement with us. Dan, you were there. You were the highlight speaker at our meetings when you came down for what was done. And we went through, gathered a lot of information, tried to define a certain set of concerns, and then the deliverable we created was a set of recommendations to address those concerns. So we went through that 6-month period. That we were thankful, and there were some other people here that were on the committee with me, and we were able to create a deliverable of recommendations that we wanted to do, and we sent that to the FAA. That ad hoc committee dissolved, and some of us have been reminding the FAA here, we're still looking for an answer, we're looking for an answer. We were able to get an interim answer after the FAA got restarted from the federal shutdown that had, really I think was mostly a response that here, we're working on it. And then we've been working with the FAA to try and get, when are we going to get the actual response to that? It's fantastic. I think you guys said it would be in June. You published it a couple days ago, so thank you for being early with that document. We have gone ahead and taken the responses that came from the FAA of that, and that's been published on the ad hoc committee website, which is still hosted by San Jose Airport. It's been posted to the City of Sunnyvale's airplane website, and it's also, I think, on our committee's website. So those documents are there. And I believe what we're going to be doing is it our next meeting? We're going to go ahead and have a response from the FAA while we'll go through it? Or in June? Possibly. Okay, so June, July, we're trying to schedule what's going to be a response. I would certainly encourage everyone to read the original ad hoc report and recommendations that we produced. It's not a terribly difficult read of what goes on. I would encourage you to read the interim response that came back from the FAA, and I would encourage you to read the response that came back from the FAA a couple days ago. And that's going to be the basis, I think, for us to be able to look through. I've only had a chance to go through it quickly once, and I did notice, I had my highlighter out, and there are a couple things that said here, the FAA believes those things might be possible to do, which I think that's as a starting point is fantastic. But we'll want to go through, I think, at whenever is the appropriate time, we'll have it, go through in more detail of what those things are, take a look at what those, and then we'll, as a committee, see what we want to go ahead and recommend. I do want to go ahead and say, because the ad hoc committee dissolved under its 6-month time frame, I believe this committee is the follow-on that goes ahead and whether or not we have to officially say that or not, but that this is the right committee that the response we'll go to, and then we can go ahead and address, if there's good ideas or things that we think can be followed through. I guess we'll take action to try and go ahead and move those things forward. But that's just kind of a quick history of what's the different committees that have happened where we've tried. I think it's great the Cities Association has been able to create this multi-county piece that does not have an end time period. Hopefully it'll end because we'll get things better. But at least it allows us an ongoing mechanism and channel for us to be able to have public input and elected official input on trying to help mitigate some of the challenges that we have. So with that, I'll stop there and answer any questions people might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Glenn at this time? Anita?
Is there an official action that we need to take to verify that we are the appropriate follow-on body to deal with the report and so on, as Glenn mentioned?
I think it wouldn't hurt if we did it. I think we have been set up to be the follow-through, but if we show our support for that action, I think that would be appropriate.
Can we take such an action at this meeting, or do we need to calendar it elsewhere?
We would calendar it.
Then can I suggest that we do so?
Yes. And do I have a second? Second. Anita and Glenn. Great. Are there any further questions for Glenn or for any of us at this point? Okay, I do have some speaker slips. So, and I'm trying to take you in the order in which I received the speaker slips. So I will open the time now for public comment. Darlene Yapley.
Thank you. One of the topics that has come up at several of the roundtable discussions is the FAA process for design and implementing a process. And I had a quick look at the response for May for the South Flow, and they have 5 stages on page 6. And what's interesting is the first stage is setting the benefits and goals, the second is designing the procedure, the third is making sure everything's in place. The full working group, which includes the airport, et cetera, is not involved till the implementation, which is the 4th step. The public, which is us, post-implementation is when we're involved. So I would encourage some exploration of this because it's important to be involved before the cake is in the oven, if you know what I mean. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Okay, all right. Mary Jo Fremont.
So I also did a quick read of the FAA response, and there are statements that I want to highlight. One on page 4 says the FAA will consider amendments or new procedures for operational or safety needs. Where is noise? Isn't it why we're here? I mean, we could be here also because of safety, but noise is completely absent from there. Page 9, they're willing to explore a charted visual approach for both the east and west side. However, here's the catch. The city of San Jose or the San Jose airports must sponsor it. Do you see the city of San Jose or do you see the San Jose airport here in these discussions? Page 13, the FAA says, well, the airport, SJC, has to invite airlines. The FAA cannot. Unless I'm mistaken, the FAA does invite airlines in their full working group so they know how to do this. Page 17, the FAA cannot issue speed guidelines to air traffic control. That doesn't make much sense to me because there are some guidelines on vectoring altitudes, and you need to consider speed and altitude together in an aircraft. So issuing guidelines doesn't mean you have to follow them exactly. So that, again, if noise was considered, you would do speed guidelines. And on page 28 says the FAA does not agree in eliminating the RNP. And my question to this committee is, if a procedure is used a very small percentage of the time, and when the ad hoc committee was meeting, it was less than 15% of the time, why would you want to keep a procedure that does not work, that is not used? Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Jo. The next speaker is Robert Holbrooke.
I have also done a preliminary review of the FAA's response to the Ad hoc Advisory Committee, and while there are a few suggestions that seem to be possible, there's not a lot of joy to be found in there, by my first take. I'll say that in many places there's good information in the report, but there are also many answers that don't directly address the question that was asked. The committee was encouraged to ask very specific questions, and now we have answers in black and white. That's good, but my impression is that the answers themselves are often quite black and white, and we need to turn our attention to the gray areas. Reading the report, I often got the impression that FAA procedures are highly optimized for safety and efficiency, with noise dropping out as the regrettable remainder in the equation. In the extreme, that may be the case, but we do not always operate at the extreme. It seems to me that it might be possible to give noise a higher priority when efficiency requirements are less demanding. At one point in the response, the FAA stated, "The techniques Controller A uses may not necessarily be the same as Controller B to achieve the same result." I think we should try to understand this better. We should explore which of those techniques would be better for the community and whether training can be used to make more uniform use of those. The FAA has done something similar with their recommendation to ATC to use the Bodega East approach over the bay whenever possible. I think this is one of the very best ideas to come out of the last 3 years. I would hope that as we move forward to the next phase of processing the ad hoc committee, the responses of the FAA to the ad hoc committee, that with the FAA, that they will share with us the perspective that noise is a problem to be solved and not an objection to be overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jennifer from Sunnyvale.
Hi, yes, I just very briefly went through the report, and I agree with Robert. There aren't a lot of, how should I say, positives that would seem to solve or help the issue of South Flow. And so I'm kind of at a crossroads here. I'm just trying to figure out, is this technique working for us? Do we need to kind of think out of the box somehow here? Maybe working closer. I just don't know how to take care of this. We pose questions to the FAA. They come back pretty black and white as almost like a no. So again, there's a problem here. We've got a problem with South Flow. We know that. So how do we solve this with the FAA? This was created through Congress, through NextGen. So how do we solve this together? I just am at a crossroads here. I just don't see very much traction here. So just thought I'd comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Landesman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members. On the San Jose Ad Hoc Committee response from the FAA, it starts out by saying, or in the part that says NEPA Act, it says, in addition to the mandate to ensure the safe and efficient use of the national airspace system, the FAA complies with the requirements of the National Environmental Policy NEPA Act. And what I've found is that we have some really great conversations with people like Nan or people from the FAA that do procedures. And then we have all these questions which have to do with the process. And we're sometimes talking at different meetings with the different expertise. And so I would suggest that, and what happened a lot in the San Jose Ad Hoc Committee, if anyone remembers what I used to say, is don't make any recommendations until you have the noise screenings, until you have assessments, because that is really the first step. So to the question of where do we have a say, where do we begin, that's the start. And we're not getting there because we keep going and saying, let's turn left and right over there, which is really a totally different topic. So I think there were lessons learned from the San Jose Ad Hoc Committee. And my thing is, I always think, well, would the FDA ask us to opine on a new cancer drug? That's just wrong. There are some things that we can be part of and some things that we need a different setup. So if we're going to think outside the box, I think we have to first know what areas we're supposed to be addressing and with whom. Thank you.
Thank you. That finishes the speaker cards that I have. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on item number 3? Okay, seeing none. I think we've pretty well covered it unless there's any more comments from the roundtable members themselves. Okay, I'm going to note that Steve Scharf has joined us. Welcome. And now I understand. and Ed Boderoff. You're here. Hello, welcome. Lisa, sure.
So I did have a question about in the report, and I'm assuming you wouldn't be able to answer it now, but it'd be great to get an answer. Why is it that either San Jose Airport or San Jose City has to request the visual flight, I'm sorry, the charted visual flight path? Why couldn't any member of the ad hoc committee request that those be created for both the east and the west? I felt like that was a joint decision by the group to ask for that, and so it seems like any of us should be able to ask for that.
So Favi, that's a question for the FAA. If you're interested in responding, you can. If you want to get back to the roundtable, you can certainly do that.
That is one of the things that is changing. So we hope that if a recommendation is made, that you have support from the airport. So it's like a two-part. So you would have to have the airport be in support of the recommendation, and there is a process in the system. When it's entered into the system, the airport has to acknowledge or support the recommendation before moving forward. I can certainly follow up if that is not clear.
Well, can we submit the request and then it's in the system, and then we can work with San Jose Airport to get them to approve versus them starting the process?
I
We could
believe you
start
can
it.
do that now. I believe
Okay.
you can do that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
In answer to your question, I did reach out to Matt Kazmarek today and requested that if I could, as chair of the roundtable, meet with the director and Matt in hopes of creating some sort of dialogue going forward. So, any further questions? All right, then we will move on to item number 4, presentation on the Select Committee on South Bay Arrivals. Chris Zanardi, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon. My name is Chris Zanardi. I'm a policy aide to County Supervisor Joe Simidian. I'm here today because I was the de facto staff, basically, for the Select Committee on South Bay Arrivals, which was chaired by Supervisor Simidian. And I was asked to come today to just make a presentation to you about the process that that Select Committee used. This work. So the Select Committee on South Bay Arrivals was established in April 2016, and it was through the leadership of our local congressional representatives, specifically Anna Eshoo, Sam Farr, and Jackie Spear. It was an independent committee, and each member of Congress appointed 4 members and 4 alternates for a total of 12 members and 12 alternates, and all of the appointees were elected officials. This slide is not great. I'm seeing now that you can't really see the list of the members of the Select Committee and the alternates, so my apologies for that. But your chairperson, Mary Lynn Bernal from the City of Saratoga, and Mr. Bodorf from the City of Capitola were members of the Select Committee, and Cynthia Matthews from the City of Santa Cruz, who's not here this afternoon, was an alternate. The charge of the Select Committee was to basically address the aircraft noise issues created by the FAA's Next Gen program. And the charge to the committee was directly from the members of Congress, and it was to review proposals that had been deemed feasible by the FAA as part of their, it was the Northern California Initiative. And the ask of the Select Committee was to make final regional consensus-based recommendations to the members of Congress. And the Select Committee received technical assistance from the FAA and SFO during their work. The Select Committee's schedule was pretty aggressive. I can attest to that, having served as its sort of administrative staff. It met over a 6-month period, and it had roughly 24 meetings. There was an initial organizational meeting up at the San Francisco airport. That was followed by 3 community meetings. They were in the evening, and there was one each in each of the 3 counties, San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz. The committee then had 10 working meetings and 5 technical briefings. From a public engagement standpoint, there was full engagement with the public with the proceedings of the Select Committee. At the 3 community meetings that I just described, the committee received formal presentations from 12 community-based noise groups. 250 individuals provided comment. At the committee's 10 working meetings, another 130 individuals provided comment at those meetings that were set aside for that purpose. And over the duration of the committee, over 3,500 written comments were received. When the Select Committee sat down at its first working meeting to begin sort of addressing the topic that was on the table, there were several organizational matters. Some of them were mundane, such as when and where will we meet, how often will we meet. But there were 2 matters that the committee spent some time talking about that I thought were important to share with you today. The first was the definition of consensus. This was a body that covered 3 counties, 3 congressional districts. And the committee had a very robust conversation about the definition of consensus. And what they settled on was they defined it as 8 of 12 votes, which was a 2/3 supermajority. And then required was at least 1 vote from each county, from San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz, from the committee members that were from those counties. On the question of how do we describe our asks, that might sound a little funny, but it was a point that was actually an item that was on, that's how it was worded on the committee's agenda at its first working meeting. And I think we all can appreciate that this is a technical, complex subject matter. And I'm sure Mary Lynn and Ed will recall that when my boss was chairing, he kept admonishing and asking people to speak in plain English, because you can very quickly get lost in the details. And so as the committee was considering how are we going to convey to the FAA what it is we want the FAA to do, sort of struggled on this point about it being such a technical and complex subject matter. And so if I can paraphrase the discussion for you that the Select Committee had, as my boss put it at the time, he said, how can we get what we want if we can't tell you what we want? And then if we're trying to tell you what we want, what level of specificity should we use? And if we use too much specificity, are we going to end up boxing ourselves into a corner that then sort of inadvertently removes flexibility that the FAA would have to try to solve the problem that the committee has identified? So in the end, as it's displayed on the slide there, the committee settled on we're not going to tell the FAA how to do something. We're going to tell the FAA what the Select Committee wants it to do. And that, in combination with the speaking plain English, I think was through line to the committee's work when it was having the ensuing conversations and discussions, when it got around to settling on recommendations and issuing its final report. The report is written, I think, in very non-technical, or as non-technical as you can do in this subject matter. And all of that, I think, was intentional. And again, it was that we weren't going to tell the FAA how to do it, just what the committee wanted the FAA to do. The work product of the Select Committee, as was illustrated in the prior presentation, the committee concluded its work in mid-November 2016. It issued a 30-page report with roughly 47 recommendations. And again, returning to my boss's admonishment about speaking in plain English, in summary, the recommendations were to fly at higher altitudes, fly over locations with fewer people, avoid noisy flight maneuvers, and implement noise-reducing retrofits where possible. The Select Committee's report was broken into 4 sections. The first section, which was, recall, the original charge to the Select Committee, was limited to the 6 sets of feasible actions that had already been identified by the FAA. And so those actions were contained in Section 1, and it was items 1 through 6 there on that slide. Then in Section 2 of the Select Committee's report, as the committee went about its business, they identified 17 other potential solutions with recommendations where appropriate. This slide illustrates the first 8, and the next slide, which I think you have these slides in your packets, were recommendations 9 through 17. Then in Section 3 of the Select Committee's final report was the identification of 5 longer-term issues for deliberation and potential action in the future. And the reality, given that the Select Committee had roughly a 6-month window to do the task at hand, along the way they identified issues that, quite frankly, any one of those 5 issues would have taken another 6 months or possibly longer to resolve. And so the committee decided to identify, call out these longer-term issues that they should perhaps be looked at in the future. And then finally, in Section 4 of the committee's report, they identified 3 process issues that the committee also had identified as it went about its work and charge for the members of Congress. The recommendations were not placed in any rank order, nor were they prioritized, and regional consensus was reached on all of the recommendations with a unanimous vote on nearly every recommendation. To return to one recommendation from Section 3 of the report, namely Recommendation 3.1, which was the need for an ongoing venue to address aircraft noise mitigation, this was one recommendation that the committee felt quite strongly about, that there needed to be an ongoing body to continue to work on these issues. There needed to be a forum provided for the community, a place for people to go, to put it quite simply. And then I think the committee recognized that a successor body or successor entity was essential to the successful implementation of its recommendations, so that there was a way for the process to continue once the committee ceased its work. So to conclude, in the end, the Select Committee issued its final report, as I said, in mid-November 2016. That report was submitted to the members of Congress. The members of Congress, in turn, submitted the report to the FAA, stating that they accepted the committee's regional consensus-based recommendations. The members of Congress asked the FAA to move forward to implement the recommendations. And since early 2017, that is what the FAA has done, which is work to evaluate those recommendations, their feasibility, and implement the recommendations deemed feasible. That's all she wrote. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris, not only for the presentation today, but your involvement all the way through the Select Committee process. I really do appreciate it. Steve, yes, questions?
Probably a small question. I understood you to say that the goal was to have a consensus, and yet most of the recommendations were agreed upon almost unanimously.
That's correct.
I think, as in my memory, there was one vote that was an 8-4 split, and that was it. Otherwise, it was very close to unanimous every time.
Great. That sounds like a nice model for this group.
I agree. I appreciate the suggestion.
Have you met us?
Glenn.
Yeah, so this is all great, and you kind of highlighted or bulleted out several recommendations. Is there a location or a place to go to where we can see the status of those?
So the Select Committee did not have a website for itself. The work product from the Select Committee is housed both Congresswoman Eshoo and Spear, and I apologize. So Mr. Farr left office, and then Mr. Panetta has carried on this issue. I'm not sure what's on Congressperson Panetta's website, but Spear and Eshoo's website both have all of the work product of the Select Committee and then all of the updates from the FAA. So that's where that information is located.
And that's also on the Roundtable website as well. We pulled that over here.
So there's a link somebody could point me to where I would see kind of a bullet list of the recommendations. Members of Congress were asked the FAA to move forward to implement these recommendations. There's a list with then a status of what is happening with each one? Or is it, if I read a lot of stuff, I can figure out the status?
So I believe what is posted to the members of Congress website are the FAA status reports. I think there's been 5 or 6 since the committee concluded its work. To your question, if you're asking, has someone posted to that website sort of a compilation of every single one of those updates, cross-reference back to Select Committee recommendations? No, you would have to review the documents and do a little bit of legwork.
And that goes to my request 2 meetings ago that you read the Select Committee report, the initial one, that was issued in November of 2016 with an adult beverage of choice and your legs up. The items that have come up since then, the reports have come in phase 1, phase 2, and they speak to specific items. The report is organized in such a way that there are enough items spread out in in a different matter and addressed in a different matter, that it's not an easy way of just saying this is the response and sliding it under this paragraph. It does involve work on our part because it was so complex. Chris?
And, Madam Chair, I need to make one clarification to what I said, which is the FAA's updates as to the Select Committee work product. So the San Francisco Roundtable was similarly working on a set of recommendations, and all of that was combined, I believe, by the members of Congress. And so the FAA updates are to the work product of both the San Francisco Roundtable and the Select Committee.
Yes. Does that clarify things, Glenn? It doesn't,
Yeah,
there's no way to make it
I think I get it.
easier.
I'm trying to hold back on what would be a request. I mean, I would assume the members of Congress would love to be able to have kind of the Cliff Notes, Reader's Digest kind of version that says, here, it looks like you'd bulletized out, 47 or some number of recommendations, and that there'd be some easy way that they would want something that said, well, here, item number 1, in progress, target date of X, on track. Item 2, target date of Y, challenges, maybe they're, the kind of thing. I would just assume they would want some way of looking at that, but I don't think I get to tell them they need to do that.
I have received an offer from our facilitator who has said that it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
under his
because
purview.
that I think, this is where I think just being able to take this complex stuff and make it into an easy to understand, transparent mechanism that the Congress members and their staff, that we, members of the public, could easily understand kind of progress and stuff. I mean, if we're able to get that done this year, I think we could, declare success.
I like that.
So I think if we can do, I'll stop there. That's great.
And Glenn and members of the roundtable, what we would propose to do is develop a matrix that shows each of the recommendations and sort of where it is in the process, what the status is. And so we'll begin working on that after this meeting.
Wonderful. Lydia?
Just remind me, was the select committee meetings recorded, audio or video?
They were, and they're all archived at, because the working meetings were at Palo Alto City Hall. Help me with the name, MidPen.
Yes. Media.
Yes, so if you go to that website and put Select Committee on South Bay Arrivals in the search box, all of the meetings will. And I believe there's links to most of the recordings on the Members of Congress website as well.
Thank you.
But MidPen is where they all would be.
Okay. Glenn, yes.
Yeah, could I just ask maybe that we could add to our website, just how, those links so that, we don't recreate it all there, but have a section, because I think we're moving in a direction of, becoming kind of a central place wherever we could go to be able to get to all these different things.
Good suggestion.
I think it's already there.
I think it's already there, I'm hearing. So, good. All right. Anybody down here? Don't see anybody. Okay. We are at item number 4. I have 3 speaker slips. So I'll open public comment at this time. Marie-Jo Fremont.
I just want to highlight an important comment that Chris made, that it was essential to have a committee, a follow-up committee for the successful implementation of the recommendations. Unfortunately, for a reason that I don't fully understand, it took forever to get this committee in place. So basically, the FAA operated unilaterally for almost 2 years or a year and a half minimum. And that's why, even though there was no committee, they published updates that are impossible to understand, believe me, because we all looked at those. Some of them were full of mistakes. In fact, some stuff that was infeasible became feasible later. And then they never, when cities or other people tried to reach out to the FAA, they completely ignored any demand, even though there was no committee. So from a public perspective, and I don't understand if there is no committee, I will still try to work out and resolve and follow up with the interested parties. I think the FAA completely ignored this, so that's just for the record. I wish we had had a better process. I wish that the the staff of the representatives had been able to keep track of all of this stuff. But again, I want to emphasize, we'll talk about Pirate later, but Pirate is a direct consequence of the FAA operating unilaterally and ignoring multiple requests from multiple cities, including FOIA requests. So everybody tried. We never got an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Landesman.
I want to echo the thank you for Chris, because she was beyond a hero in that process. And I want to remind everybody how we got to that place. We were in a state of panic, emergency. The whole lowering of the altitudes and all of these planes had just happened. And so what led to that was like, you know, it was impossible to do what was done in the select committee. That was then. So any comments about what was good, bad, or whatever has nothing to do with what was done at that committee, because the impossible was done. And Chris, I want to thank you, because I don't know how you did it. And we all we have a lot, a debt of gratitude, and to Joe Simidian's leadership. But there are issues, and before this committee was formed, we asked, and those of us working towards this, for a little session so that we could share some lessons learned and so forth. It goes back to my original point about, there are policy issues in that report, there are process issues, and where the recommendations come from. A little simple thing. The SFO Roundtable had been working on these asks for years. We had 3 weeks to come up with what we wanted, and it was told to us. I want to remind everybody that everybody here is outside of all the contours that are looked at. And the select committee was to address that. We are in a ridiculous situation. We got that committee together because the problem was over here, not to the north. Yet, a lot of those recommendations got in line before. So I just want to say, holy, holy, the select committee did a lot in an impossible situation. But now we have to look at it going forward, and we're no longer in an emergency situation, so there are no excuses. And this goes to my last point, which is you can't look at noise today. You have to look at where it came from and where it's going. We can't look at, it's a multidimensional issue. So once again, thank you.
And thank you. And Bodhi Das.
Hi, my name is Bodhi Das, and I actually live in North Santa Clara, right behind the Levi's Stadium. And I have actually spoken about the airline noise last year in June, I think, in one of the city council meetings as well. And thank you, Kathy, for your help and support with this. So I kind of want to summarize what the situation is right now, and really since late 2017, I would say more like October of 2017. I don't know any of those recommendations that we were talking about earlier were implemented before that or not. But what we have been living in the same house since early 2010, and since late 2017, the flights that are taking off and landing right above our house has gone up dramatically to as much as 20-fold. And almost every morning from 6:30 to 7:15, and sometimes it starts even earlier, every single minute there is a flight above our head, and most of the times, those are actually above 80 decibel. And if you don't trust me, there is actually a noise measurement meter, I think in the Fuller Street Park, that is tracked. You can take a look at that. And that is essentially making our quality of life really, really going low. And, we have tried lodging complaint with FAA, with SJC, and numerous times got ping pong between them. And they keep saying that nothing has really changed for 10 years, which is not true. Not only the number of flights have gone up, but the concentration on these corridors have significantly gone up, and we unfortunately are in one of those corridors. Thank you very much.
Bodhi, if I may, For the record, I didn't understand where you said you thought a noise meter was located.
That was the Fuller Street Park, I think.
Kathy,
Excuse me. Yes, the city installed several noise monitoring devices, but they're actually to collect noise from the stadium, but it actually monitors noise when planes are taking off as well.
which park is it?
It's Fuller, and you can see it on the tracker, the SGC tracker. There's a flight tracker for every single flight at every single moment. And also it shows the decibel level at those times, at those monitors.
What park?
Fuller Street
Fuller
Park.
Street.
Yeah.
Fuller
Thank you.
Street, yeah.
Thank you.
F-U-L-L-E-R.
Thank you. All right. 5, 7. All right, are there any comments from the members regarding this report on item number 4? Okay, then we will move on to number 6, the FAA response to the questions on, did I skip one? Yep, I did. Number 5, update on the FAA's review of the Select Committee on the South Bay Arrivals recommendation, including the FAA responses to questions. I want to note here that Favi will explain better than I will, that we published the agenda before they got information that Pirate had more issues that needed to be flushed out. So you will not be getting the total report that you might have anticipated regarding the questions on Pirate 2-star procedure. Favi and Than?
Do you want to start? Sure, thanks. So Than is here to help us present on both Loop and Pirate. You requested last month that we provide a technical expert to speak on Loop, so she'll be addressing that. But also with regard to Pirate, it was published on April 25th, and we had some issues. So I just want Than to expand on that, and she'll go into the Loop, which is some of the charts that you see up there.
So thank you. This is Than McLeod. And like Favi said, the Pirate published, officially published correctly on April 25th. And within days of starting to use the new procedure, NorCal approach was started to experience conflicts with that procedure and departures out of the Bay Area. So on May 15th, so just on May 15th, that procedure, we reverted back to what we have been doing conventionally for the last 30 years with those procedures. So starting on May 15th, the aircraft that would have been descending on the optimized profile descent on the Pirate are now just routed via Pirate Woodside like they had been previously, and they're being vectored and handled manually by the controllers. So there is no decision on what to do about the Pirate. Basically what the FAA has done is we've just reverted back to how we were handling those airplanes prior to the Pirate being published, and they're taking a look at what to do with the Pirate. So I don't have any updates on what will happen with the Pirate.
Than, could you explain just maybe a little bit more about what the conflict is?
Yes, so the Pirate arrival, as hopefully you're aware, it had a crossing altitude of Pirate Intersection, which is an intersection off the coast. So it's offshore, and it had a crossing altitude of 15,000 feet. And that altitude comes about, how that altitude is determined is when we build the procedure, they do an idle descent. So we actually simulate it or the airlines actually simulate it for it, the FAA simulates also, but the airlines simulate what an idle descent would look like. And it comes up with a crossing altitude at the fixes. And so the altitude for them to do an idle descent and cross Woodside at 8,000, which was the longstanding issue agreement, they needed to be at Pirate at 15 to do an idle descent. Well, that is about 5,000 feet higher than they've ever been at Pirate. And the Bay Area departures that depart out of Oakland, San Francisco, Hayward, and even some other, the wine country airports, are flying southbound, and they're trying to climb through that altitude. So it just became a safety issue that these aircraft were not low enough to miss the departures.
Can you speak to the flight management system, and that's where the error is?
So
The computer system.
So an optimized, so Favi was just asking me to explain how an optimized profile descent works, and the flight management system in the airplane flies that. So when they're issued the clearance to descend on one of these types of arrivals, the flight management system in the airplane actually calculates wind, and it looks at everything, and it will project what altitude where it should be to keep it at the most efficient descent. And typically, that's a good thing, and that does lead to quieter procedures, and it's something that the Select Committee has asked us to develop. So we try to do that. But in this case, we've got aircraft that are trying to climb out, and the aircraft that are trying to descend, and they're ending up in the same spot. So we did just revert back. So air traffic reverted back, and the procedure has to be reevaluated. Do you want me to move on to the loop, or do you want to stop after this one?
I'd like to, we are agendized for the Select Committee on South Bay arrival recommendations, which does not include loop. So please, go ahead.
That's all I have on the pirate.
Yes.
So there is, for the actual recommendations, we don't have anything, I don't have any answers on that. I was basically asked to talk about what happened with the pirate right now.
Yes.
And so that's all we have.
Do you have any updates that you're ready to give us that have to do with the new phases and the reports that have come in specifically with the Select Committee items?
Sorry, I apologize. I do not.
Okay.
Sorry, that was our misunderstanding. I thought we were just going to come in to talk about pirate, and pirate was the topic of interest that actually changed. So
Okay.
I apologize.
Including also meant the updates for the, I believe the April report is the last one that came up, the Phase 2 April report. And I don't know if that includes, I'm doing this off the top of my head and didn't bring it today. Bodega and some of the other individual updates that have come from the FAA. The report outs so I think we'll need to re-agendize that.
Yes.
Because I think it's very important that we do speak to that.
Okay.
It also speaks to what Glenn was asking about, and perhaps working together with Steve, we can get a matrix that explains the items that will be specifically relevant to us, along with some of the things that the Roundtable the San Francisco Roundtable have discussed that also will be pertinent to our area. So we will, I believe we can just re-agendize that. Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the misunderstanding. One thing I will share is that we're going to be having these telecons to get clarification on these communications. So thank you. And again, I apologize.
Thank you. Okay. So Lydia.
What does this mean with the 60 days? So it was published, Pirate 2 was published April 25th, and then we have the 60-day period running. Does this now, does this go back to the beginning when you republish it? Have you canceled the publication?
So none of those decisions have actually been determined. The publication has not been canceled, and nor has there been a decision as to whether it will be republished or what is going to happen. That literally, we did just fall back to not using it. So it's out there, but we're not using it.
So the clock is still going?
I actually don't know. I don't know the status of that.
Do you know, Favi?
No, I'm sorry. We don't know the answers to that just yet. It literally happened just a couple of days ago, and the team is investigating, and we're trying to get input from the environmental aspect and, our legal counsel and the air traffic side of the house. So we're not really prepared to answer, that.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. And I have one more question for Steve. In your memorandum that is in the packet, how do you rank the status, the importance of each of the procedure? If you could just kind of
Sure. So
help me understand that.
Lydia, we took initial shot at doing that in terms of what the procedures are, where they're occurring, and then put it out for the roundtable members to review. So if there's an objection or a difference of opinion, this is the forum to say, actually, we'd like to see this item be raised in importance or this item to set in importance. So it's out there for roundtable discussion.
When would we be able to discuss this?
You could actually do it during the member discussion period.
Okay.
Later on the agenda. Is that all for now, Lydia? Okay, I saw another hand. Anita, then Glenn.
Following up on that, I would appreciate agendizing a brief diagrammatic or mapped overview of the other two items that are, or the low and moderate importance items that are listed there, just so that we would get a nice quick visual that says, this is what this one does, and this is why we think it's probably not of high importance. Because trying to read, and I did go in and try to read them, and I read charts, I need a little more help.
Okay, thank you. I heard that as a motion. May I have a second?
Second.
Steve Preminger, second. Just a case?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can take that as a recommendation.
As a recommendation, yeah.
If you set the agenda, you can decide where it goes.
I'm just looking for support, not one person, so good. Glenn?
Yeah, so I kind of want to just go through what you were saying about Pirate is kind of from a learning perspective, because just use this as a case study. So what was, in what I would use as my parlance, what was the business objective of Pirate in this change? What's is anybody trying to accomplish?
So
I mean, I get the technical thing, but
The Pirate was an ask from the Select Committee to develop an optimized profile descent from the ocean to San Francisco. And so that's actually where the request came from.
that in theory would reduce ground noise, or I'm just trying to it's one thing to say here we want to have a descent. I'm just trying to understand, what did somebody think was going to occur that people on the ground were going to benefit?
I think that's probably a better question for the Select Committee. It was in their documentation. It is an ask of the FAA to develop it. That's really where it came from. Okay. And they specifically say, I believe, and in there to they wanted it to overlie the current Pacific II, or which was a private procedure, and so the track was defined in there also.
Okay, and then here again, this is kind of a macro thing because I'm trying to understand FAA process of how you go. And so you've got this thing here, you're going to go ahead and have this thing, but once we implement, we have a conflict with this thing that's coming here. And that seems a relatively straightforward thing, through either airport, modeling or tabletop exercises. So do you have thoughts on, how something at that level might have just been missed? And I'm not trying to, I'm trying to understand process.
No, I absolutely agree. So we actually did have track data, and the track data that was used, unfortunately, so I was part of the meetings where they were designing this and laid it out, and the track data that was presented to the work group that designed this showed that they would clear, showed that the departures would top. And so on good faith, they believed that 15,000-foot altitude the departures would climb above it. But in reality, enough of them were not. So the track data was not. So I think the lesson learned there is that we have to use more samples of track data where they had one day, and that day it looked good. But the lesson was definitely we need more data.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you.
Then I have a follow-up question. We have a lesson learned. We know we need more track data. How will this proceed then?
So again, I don't know what the status is. From my office, and what we're doing is solving what we see as a safety issue. And so it's now been elevated above me for someone to determine, how we want to proceed. If it does go back to design, then we will follow those processes, which are outlined in that DOT 41 order. But I don't even know if that's what decision will be made.
Thank you.
Can I
Glenn, yes.
follow up? Because again, you were just talking about, how the follow-up is of dealing with track data for that procedure. I'm a macro guy, if anybody's ever talked to me. Is it conceivable or a challenge that when you guys are working on other procedures, are we only using 1 day's worth of track data? Because presumably track data is a fairly common parameter that you guys use. Is it normal that you guys are using 1 day's worth of track data? My question I'm really trying to get to is, does the FAA, not we, need to look at, are they using appropriate, accurate, consistent, up-to-date, other adjectives you want to go ahead and use for all the procedures that it is that we're talking about potentially doing?
I think it's a valid question, and typically, I think oftentimes we do just use 1 day of track data. I think historically that oftentimes when it comes to arrivals, 1 day of track data is probably a lot more accurate than on departures, because departures can vary so much based on temperature and wind. And so, however, we have actually looked at where we're looking at an entire year. I know, and it does kind of depend on what you're talking about, because if you're talking about moving airplanes, then we pull in a lot more data, versus if we're just wanting to know, well, typically, what altitude are they here? So it does vary. I did get kind of an answer about what they were looking for what was the intent on the design on the OPD, and it did say that a community request to have aircraft at Woodside at or above 8,000 feet. So that was
Presumably because that would reduce, ground impact of what it is.
Yes.
Again, I just keep trying to get to, and you're probably going to hear from us as a committee, being able to she left. The comments about, there she is. Not trying to tell the FAA what to do, but and I'm going to keep going, what's the business result we want to try and achieve, which would be here, in a specific area, reduce, ground air noise impact. So that gets in measuring everything else. But okay, so thanks very much.
Can I add something? And maybe you can speak to this, but sometimes we do look at seasonal, we look at holiday, we look at weather.
That's true.
If you could just
That's true. So Favi did just point out that depending on what we are doing, there are times that we will pull in seasonal track data. So we want to see what holiday arrivals and departures might look like, or we know that it gets busy in the summer. San Francisco is one of those airports that get very busy in the summer, and so we will look at a 3-month section. So it isn't always just 1 day, and I don't want to mislead you on that, but it isn't also 1 day isn't an exception either. And I do think that that's something we can take away from that and say we need to make sure we're getting a proper sample.
Good, thank you. I do have speaker slips.
Mary Lynn?
Yes, Ed.
Sorry. Okay, I put my light on. I was trying to help. I have a question for you. I'm going to get to it. I just want to do a little select committee background, just to maybe shed a little light for Glenn. I want to bring up one of the points that Chris brought up. What we did, what we learned on the select committee in all those meetings was we were trying to figure out how to make it quieter, because what the citizens complained about was if we could raise the elevation, that would help. We had key points in Palo Alto. They were saying planes were at 5,000, and realistically they're more like 4, but they wanted that higher. And so when the Woodside people said, the planes are coming across, can you raise the point? We thought that if we raise that point and we raise another point, that would work. The lesson we learned was that the higher the planes start out, the faster they come in, and then they have to slow down, which was another problem. So it's a whole big game. But when this came in about this point, which you alluded to, is there was a Woodside request to get it above 8,000. They said this is a noise that they think they can tolerate. Not that it's any better at 9 or 8 or 7, but they just say, can you just give us 1,000 feet, some relief? So that's the business. When you say, what's the business? People want height. So this 8,000, my question is you said you were trying to do the goal of 8,000. You took them up to 15,000, which didn't work. And you said they're flying at 5,000 more than they were used to flying. So my question is, what was the original point at Woodside that they're coming in at, and at what point at Target were they at 10 trying to get to 6, or those are the two numbers that I'd like to have?
So we've had the longstanding agreement to keep Woodside at 8 is actually, I want to say it's early 90s, maybe late 80s. So Woodside at 8 has been for aircraft that were coming in from the ocean. Air traffic had a noise abatement procedure to not descend those aircraft below 8,000 over until they were east of Woodside. The altitude that we received them from, the altitude that we got them from was 10,000. So prior to the pirate arrival being published, those aircraft were descended to cross the pirate intersection off the coast of California, 10,000, and then they descended from 10,000 to 8,000, and then once past Woodside, we descended them and got them in. And that is what we went back to.
That's what thank you for clarifying that.
Any further lights? Any waving of hands? Okay. For item 5, I have Marie-Jo Fremont.
So I want to make a correction. I thought we had cleared that out last time. The select committee never requested an OPD. Sorry to be technical, but the select committee requested Woodside at 8,000 feet. They never asked for an optimized profile descent. The other thing is, personally, I'm a scientist. I worked in high tech for my whole career. Missing something like this is a good example of the safety issue that the FAA is not paying attention to, because that is not hard to catch. And if they have issue with sampling, then I really wonder how next-gen was evaluated, calculated. I don't even know if I can believe the Big Sur ground track, because they may have used whatever data. So I want for you to pay attention to this. It feels, again, the airline simulated this stuff. That reminds me of the 737 MAX, right? The FAA is not on top of their game right now, for whatever reasons, but that's no excuse. What I do not understand is, if a procedure is not working, cannot be used, why isn't it canceled? Pirate 1 was canceled because there was a missing altitude, I believe, at the waypoint Pirate. Then Pirate 2 was published with the 15,000 feet altitude. Now, Pirate 2 cannot be used, so therefore it should be removed because it cannot be programmed in the flight management system. Why is the FAA not canceling Pirate 2? And when the FAA is saying that they're reverting to their, whatever their procedures before, I want to understand, does it include that they go back to the oceanic tailor arrival for United and one other carrier? Or is it they're reverting to 8,000 feet Woodside and they still bring Oakland and so on over our cities near Palo Alto?
Thank you. Robert Holbrooke.
One of the suggestions that the ad hoc committee made was that the FAA improved its notification mechanisms for new procedures, and that we need to have better regional and local outreach. The FAA responded yesterday, in the response that came yesterday, saying, referring to the NorCal OAPM documents, which I believe were 2014, and it said, if there are any modifications to the NorCal OAPM procedures, this would constitute a new federal action, and the FAA would undertake its enhanced community outreach as appropriate. So I guess the question that I'd like to pose is this enhanced community outreach something that's starting yesterday? Did this enhanced community outreach program exist 9 months ago? And if so, was it deemed appropriate to apply to the pirate procedure? Because if it was, the community engagement has not been good. The FAA has not responded to a FOIA request that's been outstanding since October or November, I forget which, to 2 letters, formal letters from the City Council of Palo Alto and a formal letter from the cities of Mountain View and Los Altos, and I believe Menlo Park also sent a letter. In fact, I think we know almost nothing about the proposed use of this, what's forecast. And this has got the community so upset that people are talking about lawsuits, which is behind what Councilmember Koo was asking about the 60-day procedure. So if this is the enhanced community outreach, I'd say it's not working. If it's not the enhanced community outreach, I'd say it's needed immediately. And if for some reason this was deemed not appropriate, I would say that that was a severe misjudgment. Thank you.
Karen Porter, Palo Alto.
While she's coming up, one point I want to make is certainly the fact that we have Fabi and Than here have had FA at every meeting. We've had the regional director at our meetings. At our first meeting is a clear indication to me of their desire to work with and serve this roundtable and this community. Outside of this process, and there's a lot of history here, there's probably a lot of catching up that the FA has to do, but I would caution us for being too harsh on the people who are at this meeting who are here trying to help us. And I understand the frustration, the emotion, but let's not beat up the folks that are here to try to move us down the road a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We do want them to continue staying with us, and I appreciate that they are here and your remarks, Steve. Karen? I don't see you. Okay. Going once, going twice. If you do appear, I have your form there. Jennifer Landesman.
Well, I was going to say that I see an opportunity here, which is that we all want to know things at the outset. We all want data, and the environmental part can be done at the same time that this is all happening. And I really hate to take people's time, like Than's, who is really looking at the airspace, on our procedural issues. So I think that there has to be this clinical something or other to divide these questions, and I hope that'll happen. So for Pirate, for example, and I want to correct I would like to speak to the minutes and to the last meeting where a question was asked about when is the record of decision for a procedure. And it was said that record of decisions don't happen unless they are an EA. Steve, I think you mentioned that. So there might be another name for it, but it is record of determination. But my understanding is that whenever the FA takes an action, they decide about the environmental situation, whether it's with an email, a memo, an EA, a CADEX, or whatever. And so it's at that point when that record of determination is made that I think some things are published, some things are done, some noise screenings. And I understand that there might be an update to the 10-51F as to when noise screenings are done for whatever things are for the altitude. So all of that is for that. So I do want to thank you because, you know, the whole thing about the select committee was actually that we were working with the FAA. And I think that for anybody that thinks that we haven't gotten anywhere, we have, because you're here, and I know you're hearing us because there are things happening all around the country. So I am grateful for that. And so none of the other stuff, we still have a lot of work to do. My doctor says that health is a journey. Well, this is also a journey, and we're all in it kind of together, whether we like it or not. Sometimes I'm going like, why am I doing this? And it is because it does matter, and I want to definitely thank you. And but we need to get our facts straight about what's a record of determination, what's published, when the community is aware, and I think we all want the same thing at the outset. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, please.
Yeah, and Jennifer, unbeknownst to you, after the last meeting where I thought the question was more about the environmental process and then realized it was about the publication of the procedure, we followed up with an email to all the members to correct the record and make sure they understood that the 60-day clock essentially starts the day the procedure is published. So once that procedure is published, if there is a need for folks to take legal action on that, to have the FAA's process reviewed, that's when that clock starts. So 60 days from the start of April 25th would be the date.
We'll see that's the problem. For a CADEX, maybe it's the day that the procedure is published. But for the determination of what the process will be, whether it's enhanced community engagement, it's a lot earlier than that. And so this is something that needs to be clarified, because I will, protest that the date begins when it's the day that the procedure is published, because that means we've been left out of everything. So what's the point? We really have to get those facts straight. Thanks.
Thank you. Darlene Yapley.
Hi, I wanted to frame the pirate situation as an example of a process problem. So we definitely don't dispute that the select committee recommended the Woodside VOR at 8,000. no dispute. The issue is we did not ask for an OPD, neither did the Select Committee, which means a narrow corridor. Second, we did not ask for a procedure to be turned from a private to a public procedure, meaning all carriers now get to use it. We did not ask to now have not just San Francisco, but now we have Oakland and possibly San Jose, we just heard, use it. So this process problem is important because, as you heard in the presentation from Chris, we told them what to do, not how. Now we got an issue with how, even though we're supposed to let them do the how. That's the catch-22. Second of all, this group is supposed to ensure the successful implementation of those recommendations, and I question if they were successful because they were supposed to reduce noise, at least reduce noise, and not increase noise for others. And I think everyone doesn't want to move noise. Even the FAA in their response to the South Flow said, we will not move noise unless all the communities agree. Well, no communities agree because we didn't know any noise was going to be created additionally. So this is a conundrum. The process has a problem. It was interpreted wrong, and we can't stop it, and the justification is we asked for it. So that's the conundrum. The other conundrum is that we have 60 days after April 25th to take legal action. Now we're not sure, do we move forward and take a legal action? Do we wait? We only have 30 days, and as we all know, and you all know, it's very hard to work through our cities in a short time frame, and we don't know what the deadline is, and we don't know when the deadline is. We don't know when a decision is going to be made. This is all about process. Forget pirate. It's about process that could happen to anyone sitting here in any city. Is not just about pirate, and that's what I want to underscore.
Thank you, Darlene. All right. Is there anyone else that would like to speak at this moment? Seeing no one, I'm going to move on to, yes, Favi.
Thank you. I just want to reassure you that we are working, and I understand the frustration, and I'm really sorry, but we have been hearing your concerns and taking them back to the office and to all of the teams that are working on the issues, whether it be in the service center up in Seattle or our AGC, our legal counsel or headquarters, or just across our organizational boundaries. There's a lot of people that are working on the issues. And last time several of you gave me correspondence, and I just want you to know that we did follow up on those correspondence. And there is one letter in particular that is on hold. It's in reference to pirate. It was going to be, you should have had a response last week, but when this situation happened, it was delayed a little bit so that we're able to update it with current information. So you should be receiving it. I have a copy of the letter with me. There were other letters that I just want to acknowledge, letters sent to Dan Elwell, to Kim Davis, and to Raquel Gervin. I really want to encourage you to send those letters to Raquel Gervin, the regional administrator. It really makes it easier for us to track and respond, and also go through you. If we can just all make sure we all know what we are expecting of the FAA, there's a lot of stuff that we're answering to. Also, in the last 60 days, we worked aggressively to respond to the San Jose ad hoc recommendations and to finalize that. That's a lot of coordination that was required on our part. As far as the FOIA is concerned, there were some delays. We have acknowledged that, and we have communicated with the requester several times to provide updates. We're not trying to keep any information. I believe as of this morning, the requester should have a response maybe within the next week. So I hear you. We're doing follow-up. These things take time. One of the challenges that we're having also is that because we are trying to be supportive and be present here, and you're meeting monthly, it just poses a challenge on us. We will continue to be here, but just keep in mind that other roundtables meet quarterly or every other month. So just please know, we hear you. We're trying to make progress. There's a lot of stuff going on, and all of the people that work on any of these issues, it's the same team. So the same team is having to look at everything that we're talking about here today. So I just wanted to mention that and hope that you please bear with us. We will continue to work together. We'll continue to be present, and maybe it's just a matter of how, and I apologize, I didn't pick up the name on the comment, but maybe just looking at a different strategy for the technical aspect when you require technical information from FAA versus more stuff that could be more administrative or just informational. I don't know what it looks like, but I look forward to just having the dialogue and seeing how we can move forward together. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Favi. I appreciate hearing that from you. We have not been in a situation since down here in our 2 counties to respond. There's been a lot of shakeup in Washington, D.C. and with the FAA, where letters were guided to a specific individual, and that individual was no longer at the FAA or in the position that they had been at when the letter was sent. As soon as this information came to us and to the FAA, they scrambled to find the letters, and I appreciate their efforts to responding now. We are in place. This is a slow-moving process. We definitely do need to get the education going and lay the groundwork. So I ask for your patience, even though it is the noise that is for so many health issues that are driving the sense of urgency. But we are working together to move forward and in a positive way with the idea that we are the legitimate heir to the Select Committee. So I keep getting that in there. Anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to item number 6, which is...
Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
I can't, okay.
Favi, thank you very much. And I know, having worked for the federal government, what it's like when you're in a regional office and headquarters yank something and then you have no idea what they're doing. And it kind of sounds like that's where you are. I just want to confirm a couple of things, since we were one of the authors of a letter. So we can look forward to getting a response within about the next week, you believe?
Definitely.
Okay. And the other thing...
It was almost ready to go out last Thursday, and this hiccup happened, so we wanted to update it.
Great, because my council wants to know what's going on, and I need to tell them next Tuesday what's going on. And then the other thing is, and this is a process question since we're all talking about processes, as somebody decides what's going to happen next with Pirate 2, how are we going to be informed what's going on? Is that something that's going to flow from headquarters to you, to Steve, to us? How is this going to happen? Somebody help me out. Because I didn't know it had stopped. Apparently, some people had documents or a memo from someone that said something that had happened with Pirate 2. I had nothing walking in today. So what are we doing here?
Well, okay, so what we've gotten into a practice of doing, and we try to do this anytime something like this happens, is to communicate to our first, I guess, points of contact, if you will, if it's an airport impacted, if it's the congressional staff, or maybe the Roundtable. So I know this was very quick, happened pretty quickly, and I mean, within a couple of days ago, but I think that is more about us establishing how we want to move forward. I would truly prefer to communicate, as I have been, with congressionals and the Roundtable members, as well as the airports, and then leave it up to our chairwoman to disseminate, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can certainly look at how we communicate this in the future. We will be discussing that at our follow-up phone call and informing you.
And since my name was mentioned,
Yes.
I try to keep an informal line of communication open with Favi. We do have planned a process of, after each of these meetings, and this will start next week, of having myself chair Favi and any other staff that she needs on the phone to basically get together and say, what did we hear? What are the action items? What does FAA need to do? With respect, Anita, to your question regarding Pirate, the FAA and Favi in particular has indicated that they're going to keep us informed about new procedures, items that are coming out. I would assume, and I don't want to put words in Fabi's mouth, but if there are developments on Pirate 2, then you would get word to your congressionals, to Mary Lynn and Andy and myself, and then we can disseminate that to the rest of the roundtable. And this is a situation truly where we learned 3 days ago that Pirate wasn't being flown. So had we known a week ago, we would have let you know a week ago. But since we're meeting today, we thought this was the appropriate forum.
Thank you. Elisa?
So kind of along the same lines, I'm wondering if it is written down somewhere where I could read about what type of community engagement is done for different topics, and when like enhanced community outreach is done versus, say, maybe not enhanced. Are there different levels, and when do they apply? Is that written down somewhere?
So I know you've been asking for a Gantt chart also, and that's another item, right, that we've been trying to work on to getting you. So what I have is not current, but it is public information. It's a Gantt chart. You can find it in all of our community involvement websites and the projects that we've worked on. Basically, it is what we refer to as the Point 41 process, and it shows when the community will engage and at what point. So preliminary activities, design activities, development, when we go out to do community outreach, when we engage the airport or select officials or whomever. It is depicted here. Problem with it, and why I hesitate to share it with you, is because it is changing, and because there are times where we do have to do more community outreach, and it really just depends. But as a standard, I mean, I'd be happy to share with you, leave this with you, and you can look at it. It is in the, again, it is accessible through the community involvement website for probably all of our Metroplex projects or PBN.
And Steve is offering to distribute it.
I'm sorry?
Steve is now offering to distribute it.
Okay.
Thank you. To the members at large, yeah. Okay. We are running a little bit behind, Lydia. I'm going to take you as the last, and Glenn promises to be short.
Thank you. Since the question about communications came up, the community engagement part, I don't know if I could ask it now or should I ask it at member discussion, because I would actually really like to know when and where does it come up, at what point when a procedure comes out or new information, when does that community engagement happen, and how much before, I think Ms. Landesman had asked that question, how much before publication does the community engagement take place? Because I have to say, I really didn't know about Pirate until the community told me, because they've been watching the IFP Gateway. So I don't know if it's now the time to talk about it or maybe at member discussion.
You've asked it, they can respond, but I think it would be better under membership discussion.
Okay, I can hold.
Okay, thank you.
We can think
And
about
Glenn,
it.
thank you.
Yeah, just real quickly, so you said, it's great you're going to share with us, Steve's going to get around the current process. I would just request, you said it's possibly changing, that if it does change, when you tell us about it, can you show us the old and then the new? Just because understanding what's changing is going to be important as well.
When it changes, I will let you know. Just remind me to share that with you. But I do want to make sure we recognize that this is not current, and this was for Phoenix. And every project does have potentially a different level of outreach.
Thank you. I think we'll bring this up again as we get to member discussion. So we are about 10 minutes off, so I'm going to move on to the number 6, FAA response to questions on Loop 5 procedure. Fab?
So thank you. Once again, you had submitted questions, and I've been advised that you will get those answers in writing. I am not here to answer the 15 questions that you had submitted. I did want to clarify some changes that did happen to the loop, and so I did want to go through that. I also want to just acknowledge that it appears that my statement when I said that the Select Committee submitted for the OPD, that could have been an inaccurate statement. Again, those decisions do come from above me, so I know by the time it got to our facility, we were requesting to develop one, so I certainly don't want to misspeak and say that a committee recommended something and it seemed to upset people, so I apologize for that. So I did want to start off with the loop, and this is the diagram up on the board is the loop 4, and this is what was in effect and has been in effect for many years. And the change to the Loop 5 is actually a result of something I submitted to the Gateway. And I'm very familiar with why it changed and how it changed. And at the last meeting, we didn't fully explain that to you, and so I wanted to explain it. The Loop is a conventional procedure, meaning that it is not flown by the FMS, nor was it changed to be flown by the FMS. It is a hand-flown procedure, and it is a vector procedure, meaning that the controllers, with the exception...
Could I ask for FMS, please?
Yeah, so sorry, that term was used on the last meeting, so I assumed you understood. So FMS is just the flight management system on the airplane. It's when the airplane flies a procedure. It's what leads to very precise tracks. It's what leads to a lot of concerns about concentration of noise. So when the airplane flies a procedure, it tends to fly it pretty accurately. When a pilot flies a procedure, it's very much like when a controller controls a procedure, there's variation in timing and technique. So the loop is a pilot-controlled departure procedure, and it has instructions on how they're supposed to fly it. And if you look at the graphic, there is this north-south bold line you might see, and if you can read it, it says 340 degrees. That line on that procedure started to cause problems with newer pilots, and we are creating a generation of people that are very automation dependent, and we have pilots that are very used to having the airplane fly things, and I'm not saying that they're not good pilots, but going back to looking at old charts and going, okay, what does this mean? We had pilots departing that they would see that bold line, they would be making, you kind of see the line that curves, that makes the U-turn, they would be flying that and they would get to the bold line and they would make a sharp left turn. And it was very dangerous. And we had it enough times that I put in a request to change the graphic, to change this procedure to make it clear to the pilot what we wanted them to do. That bold line is there for a lost comm situation, and lost comm means the pilot's radios have failed and we can't talk to them and we need them to get to a safe altitude because they are in mountainous area. So that's a lost comm procedure that they were doing inadvertently. I needed this procedure to be changed to stop that. I did request the Loop 5. If we can go to the next slide.
And
oh, do I do it?
Yeah,
I do
and
it. Yes, we can.
Your pointer on
I'm
that.
in charge.
Your pointer on that actually will, when you point at one of the screens, will
Oh,
point
great.
at all the
This
screens.
is nice. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And
So-
it's important for our video recording. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is what has been published, and this is out there right now. I am not happy with this plate, and I since followed up when this came out on April 25th. I made an immediate phone call and said I'm not happy because this didn't do what I asked for. And you'll see there's 2 red boxes on this chart, and where it shows this line, well, they didn't fix the problem. It still kind of points to this bold north-south line. And then we went to the trouble to add this intersection to try to teach the pilots, we want you to continue that right turn toward this. And then they added this 180 line that actually is pointing due westbound. And so I wasn't happy with this one either. Again, the procedure is not, we aren't looking for the pilots to fly it differently. We're not training it differently. It's not being controlled differently. I was trying to fix a pilot interpretation problem. So on May 23rd, so tomorrow, there will be a new chart. And I wanted to give you the heads up that the new chart, again, the new chart will look like this. And so this is what I had asked for. Show the right turn going all the way through that north-south bold line. Show a heading to go south. and then show a 180 line. But again, if you read the instructions to how this is flown, it basically tells you that air traffic controllers are going to turn you. You're going to make this loop, you're going to turn southbound, and air traffic is going to turn you back north. And there is no change to that. I do have some track data. So here, this is the loop 4. So this is how it looked before we changed it. And you can see they make that sweeping arc and they turn south, and this pilot flew it correctly. And where those kind of turns are, these are all air traffic controller vectors, and they turn them and then they send them back up on their way. So this was prior to the change. Here's one that flew at this, it's still Delta. I wanted to get comparative flights, so I got another Delta Airlines flight, and here's one how they flew the Loop 5. And yep, this one went further because this is controller-based and traffic-based, but they made those same turns. And some people were saying, well, now the Loop 5 is bigger, so I did add another one to show, well, here's the Loop 4, and there's the Loop 5, and you can see that they're not always bigger. Because it is pilot flown and controller controlled, they vary. So my last slide just kind of shows there's the green, those are Loop 4. Again, this is just 1 day's worth of traffic, and so it truly is this is just 1 day, and then the pink is 1 day of the new procedure. And so that is really all I came to talk about the loop. I know you do have your other questions about it, but I did want to just clarify what we had said previously.
Thank you, Thon. Are there any questions for Thon? Glenn?
So, Dan, this is why I like it when you come, because you explain stuff and us mere mortals can understand it. So I think it's great. And I get what you're trying to do, but when you see how, the overlap or size of the loop changes, is that part of just the consideration of, as you were trying to, train pilots, whatever words you want to go ahead and use, but the fact that it goes ahead and creates what I'll just call a secondary effect. Is that taken into account as you guys are looking at the procedure change and who might need to be told or not? And again, I'm trying to ask this at the macro level question, using this as just an example.
So I would have to disagree with the statement on this particular procedure. The size of did not change, and that's kind of what I was trying to point out. For example, here's one where the old procedure is way bigger than the new procedure. Mm-hmm. And then you go to this one, and the new procedure is way bigger than the old procedure, because there is no standard size for this particular procedure. This particular procedure, they fly southbound until the controller can turn them back north. And that's based on what other traffic do I have going in? How fast is the airplane climbing? There's other, so this one doesn't have a standard size. It has a kind of a window. Some of them turn very tight, and so it's anywhere from a mile south of the vortex, to 10 miles south. So in this particular case, I would have to say, no, we didn't consider that. Would we consider that? That is part of, and I need to defer and not talk out of my school because I'm not an environmental specialist, but I do know that the width of a procedure and how it is flown is considered in the environmental evaluation.
So there's maybe something missing from this diagram, which would be like a hatched overlay that says, here, this is the allowed space where we think it could fly, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
No. No, it's going to fly. They're going to fly where the controller needs to put them. These types of procedures that are vector procedures, we try to be efficient. So would we want a controller to continue this aircraft southbound until he's all the way, past Santa Cruz? No. We need to get them on their way as fast as we can. But there is we wouldn't ever tell a controller, you have to turn them by here, because if there's traffic, they're turning them where they can. They're getting them on their way as soon as they can based on everything else that's around them.
Okay. And then, again, at the macro level, where, if we do submit something to the FAA and being able to try and make sure we put the right language in so that, it's almost I'm thinking of the telephone game, what do you say to one person, it goes down the line, what you get out the other side. So even you have a challenge where you were trying to get something specific done. Do you have suggestions for us that as we get down the road to where we're going to be making requests for changes and things, are there recommendations you'd make to us in terms of how we should make those requests or the clarity of what we need to say so that if we put in a request for a change, it doesn't, and I assume it doesn't happen all the time, but that we're getting the result we're trying to ask for? I'm just looking, how do we clearly make the ask?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to answer that, Glenn, because what we request, we can't really tell you how to submit your request, but we can certainly talk it through to make sure that we're both understanding what the ask is. And we've done that through, I would say, telephone calls outside of this process. So that would be an opportunity. Once you are ready to submit a recommendation, we can have a conference call and say, here's what we mean by this, and we can ask questions and get clarification, and that's one way of doing it.
Yeah, I would just hope we go ahead and do that, because again, if the expert, and I said it under my breath, the guru over there, if she has challenges with that communication linkage, then this is not my day job. How can you help us through this process make sure that what we're asking for is what we're, from an objective perspective, is really clearly understood all the way through the process? And any way you can help us do that would be great.
There were certain times on the select committee that we spent the time making sure that what we were stating, and there was a lot of back and forth of what we were stating was understood on both sides. This is something that we can look into at a subcommittee level too. All right. That was the end of the loop. Thank you, Than, very much. Again, I deeply appreciate your bringing it down to our level and helping us understand. The graphics are always tremendous when we have a map going forward too, as to what's being affected and how it looks like on the ground. So thank you. Yes. Yes, you did respond to the requests from the members. Favi, and then I see Ed.
I just want to add that the graphics, there were some questions in the 15 that were sent to us earlier, and there was questions about where can you all go back and look at these graphics, find these depictions. There really is no place other than I can tell you, we're going to leave these with you. You have them now, and you can post them on your website. And we will say something to that effect when we respond in writing.
Thank you. Ed.
Yeah, I want to again echo the great thanks for explaining that, because it's what we can actually visualize. The premise of the select committee was to try to ask the FAA to fly the planes where people didn't live. That was our goal, okay? And in this case, when I look at this, that's not possible, because whatever route you take, you're going to impact somebody. And so when you go back to that one slide that had, I think, all the flights, when you combined everything. Yeah, see, when I look at that, that reinforces to me that was kind of like part of the goal of the select committee, was to diffuse the noise as much as possible over as many households as possible, because if you would have shown me that it was always one route that they were flying, then that would be problematic if it was a move. But what that demonstrates to me, at least what I'm seeing there, is that this is a good effort to try to achieve the desired goal, which you stated was get them on their way in any number of varieties, but yet it's not on any one route. Fair statement? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are now going to move on to item number 7, comments from the public. And boy, do I have a stack. I've tried to keep you in order of submittal, and please recognize the time limits. Jane Manning is first.
Hello, I'm Jane Manning. I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I just had a couple questions about the IFP Gateway importance list that was in the agenda package. Currently, departures to Southern California are among the different routes that really heavily impact the noise situation in the Santa Cruz Mountains above areas like Saratoga, Los Gatos, the Castle Rock State Park area. There are numerous routes that affect this area. And I wondered if, when we're looking at the evaluation of importance on the IFP gateway, like was in the agenda packet today, whether that particular area is considered an area that we would think has, is negatively affected by the different routes on the list. In other words, would it, if a change would impact that area, would it become an important change in the IFP gateway? And so, as one example, recently the FAA said that they would engage with the SFO Roundtable to work on the night procedure. And the night procedure has a transition that flies down along the spine of the Santa Cruz Mountains to Southern California. And so that would be an example of a procedure that would be occurring with the SFO Roundtable that might not seem like it impacts, this area, but it would definitely impact the ridge of the Santa Cruz Mountains because those flights are very, very numerous. And I would be concerned that any changes that happened on the night procedure would add additional noise, or we would miss the opportunity in making changes to the night procedure to actually alleviate some of the noise along the Santa Cruz mountain ridges. So thank you.
Briefly respond to that. As I had mentioned earlier, one of the comments regarding why were certain procedures identified as important or not. We took an initial cut at it. It's up to this group to assess what's important and what's not on that. And so definitely if, for example, Santa Cruz representative wants to say, I really think we should make sure that this one's important, or if there are other measures that Roundtable members want to make important, they can go ahead and do that. It was just a first cut to get something in front of people to work with.
We're looking at the time, and I have, as I said, a lot of speaker slips. I am going to have to cut you down to a minute now, please, just so that we can honor the space here and your time and the members' time and the advisors' time. So Robert Holbrooke, you're up next, followed by Dennis DeCuster. Sorry if I've mutilated your name.
I think the committee might be moving toward this idea, but there's a lot of confusion about process. We know that the IFP gateway is not the place to implement, to add concerns about noise. We know that's not the place to intercept and provide input on upcoming procedures, but we don't know what is the right place. I would encourage the committee to ask the FAA, or perhaps Steve could help with this, what is the FAA's process with regard to NEPA? And more generally, what's the process for the community to engage with the FAA to make suggestions and raise concerns before a procedure is frozen to the point that it's very difficult to change? If we could have that laid out, and it sounds like that may be a subset of the work that you guys are working on, I think that would allay a lot of concerns. And I think it is probably at the top of the list of concerns that folks in the community have among all of the concerns about how we might engage the FAA. So I'd suggest that as a topic for a future presentation. Thank you.
Dennis? Okay. Something came up. Wow. Okay. A relic. Jane Manning, are you here? You just spoke. Okay. I think somehow we've gotten a little extras. Yeah. Okay. And Robert, you're here from the last meeting too. And Darlene, do you want to speak?
Bingo. I understand that FAA is a large organization and it takes time to accomplish actions. I definitely recognize that. I used to work in many Fortune 500 companies. I appreciate the follow-up to the letters to the cities. I think, ironically, the impatience and why we're pushing so fast is we have a 60-day statute of limitations, and that is imposed on us by the FAA. So the follow-up I would suggest is that the FAA has the ability to provide a tolling agreement that would extend the 60-day deadline. So if they want us to have more time and we give them more time, that is completely possible. We don't have to be so urgent. Our urgency is that if we don't file within 60 days, we give up our rights forever. And that's the urgency. So again, the option is the FAA can offer a tolling agreement that could extend the 60 days and we all can just relax and have a little more time to work through these things, which I would love to see.
Thank you. Marie-Jo, you're not left over from last time for sure, right?
So
Okay,
I
thank you.
also want to thank Fan. Every time she comes to a meeting, we get great value. And thank you for correcting the record on the OPD. I completely get you. Someone at the FAA must have told you to do it, but not the select committee. And thank you for great graphics on Loop 5. But I want to help everybody here. You can look at all the ground tracks. You cannot tell if it's better or worse. Doesn't matter. I mean, it's good to look at them, but the size doesn't matter. What matters is how this plane is going to be flown. It's the speed, it's the altitude, it's the flaps, the slat, the power engine. It's also the wind conditions and so on. So what you want is the noise.
Okay.
And what's missing all the time is about the impact on people on the ground. So it's great to have the grounds, the layout, but all these overlays and so on do not tell you what's the reality on the ground. So until the FAA, when they make a procedure or would like to make a change, they need to also model the impact. And by the way, once they implement, they need to follow up with actual measurements. Thank you.
Thank you. This is getting even more fun. I have a leftover one from Darlene. You've had your chance, though. I'm going to be tough. Okay, Zachary. Thank you. Zachary Kaufman, thank you.
Since we now have the FAA response to the ad hoc committee, it just came out, I presume it may end up on the agenda for the next meeting. Will the next meeting be held in a location conducive to affected residents making public comment? I imagine if it was in, say, Santa Cruz, you would get a less interested audience in SJC South Flow.
I do not forget. It is in Santa Cruz County at the Board of Supervisors. The next meeting and the date is, although I was planning on doing this at the end of the meeting, June 26th.
And if I might just add, this schedule was voted on and approved by the Roundtable a couple of meetings ago. The main reason to do that is we have to secure the meeting space and get cooperation of the various cities and counties to help do that. So it happens several months in advance to make sure that we get those places laid out.
If I could just say, but you guys haven't decided that that's the meeting where we're going to do that topic. So that's really what he's talking about. So it's still in your control.
And under consideration for sure. And the last speaker I have is Jennifer.
Hi, yes, I kind of am voicing or mirroring what Zach said. Yeah, having a discussion about the SJC ad hoc report in Santa Cruz may be kind of problematic. But I did also want to mention a couple of things. I've been in a number of meetings with Than, and I have to say she is phenomenal. So when we're talking about the FAA and the bureaucracy, it's like being part of a corporation, right? You're part of a corporation. You may be a phenomenal employee. We are not blaming you. I mean, you, out of everyone in the FAA, are like a goddess to me. So I can't even describe how happy I was to see you here. So I just wanted to leave the group here with that kind of thought, because again, the FAA, I agree, you get pissed off at the FAA. They're a bureaucracy. They tend to put us off. But Than is one of the great people there. So I just wanted to say that.
And not to diminish that, I believe it truly and full-heartedly. Her voice coming in while I was in a rehabilitation bed at a facility in Saratoga was always wonderful because I could understand, even with some of the drugs, what she was saying, which is a big need to get through the filter. However, that said, I believe that we have a good group here that is showing up weekly, monthly. It feels like weekly for the amount of time I'm putting into it. But I would like to think that we have the support. I know we have the support here going forward. And so, Jennifer, thank you. That was very much appreciated on all our behalfs to hear that, and the others who echoed that. So I'll move on from item 7 now to item 8, which is member discussion. I'm going to have Steve do a little introduction to the strategic plan. This is an attempt on our part to speak to some of the items that we were hearing over and over. How do you measure success? What is the criteria? What is it that we actually do want to achieve while we are sitting here having so much fun from 1 to 3 on Wednesday afternoons at the end of the month?
And I will be very brief. So we discussed this as we prepare for each of the meetings about how do we go about creating a strategic plan and also a work program for the Roundtable. And in the past, I helped the San Francisco International Airport create, I believe it was their first strategic plan many years ago, and we did it over several meetings. Chairperson's response to that was, that's not going to work. and so the idea was that we would put together a strategic plan for Roundtable member review and criticism, and then off of that strategic plan would be a work program, which we would also draft for you. So for those of you who are not familiar with the strategic plan, it serves as a long-term, typically a 3 to 5 year overarching guide to an organization's activities. It typically articulates the mission and vision of the organization, as well as the guiding principles to follow in executing the work program or work plan for that group. And it provides the basis for developing the detailed Santa Clara, Santa Cruz Roundtable work program, which guides the day-by-day work efforts, much of which we will be carrying out in our role as the facilitator and consultant. The San Francisco International Airport Community Roundtable Strategic Plan provides a really excellent example of what these look like, particularly for an aircraft noise roundtable. Quick screen capture there shows you what the first full page of the plan looks like if you go to either the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz Roundtable website or the SFO website. You'll be able to go into the link for the San Francisco Roundtable, click on resources, and a copy of that plan is there. You might do that as sort of homework before the next meeting. And the contents there show you sort of what's in the plan, what's in the background of the plan. But the idea is between now and when we see you in June, assuming we agree that this is what we want to have on the agenda and nothing else comes up that displaces it, we'll put together a draft work program or strategic plan for you to review and have you work through that, review it, and criticize it. We will get it out to you ahead of time so that you have a chance to mark it up and bring it to the next meeting and then adjust it accordingly at that meeting. Our goal is going to be to work through that, probably electronically on the screens, make those changes to it that you might have at that time, and then ultimately get consensus on each of the sections that we're changing, and then at the end of the process, you may choose to formally adopt that strategic plan if it fits your needs and goals. So with that, that's a quick overview of what we expect to be doing related to the strategic plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Are there any questions for Steve? Okay, then we will move on to other items from members. And I hope you all have been keeping notes of the items that you wanted to discuss. Lydia, I will call on you first.
So mainly it's the chart that Steve has. If you could kind of briefly, or take your time, kind of go over how you describe their importance, and if we can go into providing our comments or how we feel it affects our communities and its importance.
So Lydia, you're talking about the IP gateway chart?
Yes,
Yeah.
the chart that you provided.
Sure. Yeah, and so what we agreed to do several meetings ago was to monitor the activity on the IFP gateway, to identify if there are any new procedures that are popping up on it, And we thought it might be of value to the roundtable to provide sort of an evaluation as to the types of issues that this group handles, whether they're low importance, medium importance, high importance. And so our technical staff, Chris Sequeira and Chris Jones, who you met at our first meeting, go through, discuss it, and provide these essential ratings, looking at where is it occurring, what's below where that procedure is, what type of change might it represent. But again, it's completely up to this group. If you wish, as an organization, to change these ratings, you're welcome to do that.
And obviously, for us, we would consider pirate to be pretty high importance to us in order to address.
Yes.
If I can make a request based on Lydia's comment, I think it'd be really helpful maybe to agendize over the next 2 meetings, and I realize that with a strategic plan that's going to be tough. On the other hand, a concurrence of what's important here to us from this list will affect the work plan, I would think. So maybe we could ask Steve and staff to go through what they judge as the high priority ones next time, and just kind of quickly walk through what those are with us and what they see as the reason for doing high, and then at the second meeting, take the low and mediums, or some combination thereof, depending on what he thinks will take the most time. But split them up and kind of whale through all of them.
And whether pirate will be available for, yes.
And
good.
also, if this is coordinated with the San Francisco Roundtable, I think a point that Ms. Manning made, do we discuss any of this and coordinate with the San Francisco Roundtable so that we're not undoing what they're doing or they're undoing what we're doing? Is that communication going through? I just kind of want to make sure that.
That's something that I'm trying to work on with them. I haven't gotten any response yet, but I continue to knock at their door and ring their bells. So
thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I guess my other question was the community engagement by the FAA. I really would like to, a few of our citizens or constituents have asked, how does that take place from, when a new procedure or a new development comes out? Where is the engagement? I hear community engagement a lot, but do they come into our communities, the communities that are affected? How does that work? When does it happen? What does it look like? Because I haven't been to one or been engaged in one.
So, Ms. Koo, if I may, one of the things that we're doing now is we've been doing, but just want to reiterate, is that when a procedure is introduced and being looked at in the Point 41 process that I'll share and leave this with you, the airport is present at these work groups, and they represent the community. That is typically who speaks for the community. They're aware of noise-sensitive issues, and that's how it's been. So I'll leave this with you, and you can see the other where actual community outreach is held, where we go out and as far as determining what communities we go to, we get input from, it could be the congressional staff, it could be the airport, it could be the roundtable. So you would be able to provide some input as to where that outreach needs to take place. So does that make sense?
I'm sorry. So you would reach out to the roundtables in order for us to go out and give the information to our communities?
No. As far as when we do outreach, we find locations that, they have to be ADA accessible, they have to meet certain requirements, and of course be impacted by the change. But we will get input on those locations. And we'll get input from the airport or the select officials that we're working with, or the congressional officials, or the roundtable. So, but again, I'll leave this with you, and then we can talk more about that piece of it.
Yeah, maybe that part of it needs to be a little bit more robust and thought out because I don't think we knew about Pirate 2 until residents told the San Francisco Roundtable, and then they had somebody come out and do the community engagement, I would think, but it was more like a presentation of the procedure itself. In terms of reaching out to where the affected areas were, it was very minimal and really difficult to find out. And I wouldn't feel comfortable taking the procedure itself and taking it to my community to explain it to, it would just be wrong, yeah, so.
Understood. There seems to be a little bit of confusion here. With item number 7, that was time for public comment. This is now, I'm working on May 22nd agenda. Number 8. We are now number 8. This is the member discussion.
Right, we are on number 8.
We are on member discussion, which is us, not out there.
The public cannot submit comments on item 8 of the agenda?
We are already running late this time. That's correct. We're trying to get information from the members who sit at this table as to what they care for. You've had your opportunities with the public comment prior to this, which we got some sound ideas, and I need to move forward for the time.
Mission was disclosed, sorry. That's why
We can definitely carry it over next time. And you can always submit your information to your city representative, who can then present it to me. So we have not shut down the communication line at all. So Lydia, did that answer your question?
It did, but I think that if the FAA would be willing to kind of discuss further about what community engagement would look like from our group to give suggestions, I would really appreciate if we can do that.
And we will be talking as a follow-up to see what we can do to possibly agendize that or look to the future for discussing it. Steve, I think I saw you raise your hand.
Right. Sorry, I was at a council meeting until 2:15 a.m. last night, so I may have misunderstood you when you said the airport is representing the public. Is that what you said, that that when the airport speaks, they represent the public? Or did I not hear you correctly?
Yeah, at the initial stage, that is who represents.
Okay, well.
Initial stage in the.
Well, I think that definitely should be agendized because that doesn't seem logical to me. Having lived in the flight path of San Francisco Airport in the past, I would not accept that the airport advocates for the interests of the public. So the other thing, so this is the third time I've been on one of these groups, and I keep hearing the same thing, that we prioritize efficiency over noise reduction, and that the airlines would object to reintroducing some kind of randomness to diffuse the noise because it would result in a loss of efficiency and greater fuel consumption. So I just wonder, when you go off the rails, what is the percentage increase in fuel consumption? Is it 0.1%, 0.2%, 1%? We never have gotten, well, I've never gotten an idea of what the loss of efficiency is, if it's significant or it's so small that it would barely be hard to measure. So I'd like some answer on that at some future meeting. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anita, anything? You're done? Okay, Glenn?
Yeah, so we're talking a little bit about process, and I want to go back to, I believe, what was a decision and a commitment that was made in the last meeting from the FAA. And I think we need to be careful of, are we talking about the way the procedures have been or how it's going to go forward when something new comes up? Because we're kind of in this gray water area. And I just want to reconfirm that as we talk about this process and what it's going to be, is that the FAA committed that for new things that started, you know, anything after our last date, we were going to be notified early on in the process. I kind of, you know, said here, you know, 5-step thing, we'd be at 1.5. And so I think to some of these questions that we're talking about, the process, you're talking about how the process is going to change, how it's going to work. I think one of the things I thought I heard last time is that this committee would be notified by things that affect our communities early on in the process where we'd still have an opportunity to have input before, we've started laying out the cement and things like that. And I think that will help a lot. And to be able to see that, I don't know if that's in the documentation, you're showing us or that we're going to be able to see where that is. So we all have a graphic representation in front of us so that for new things, again, stuff that's already started, it's a different story, then we can all have an understanding of what the process looks like. And we can see what, based on notification to us, what that means for community input and all those other kind of things. And I think that's, once we get into the new world, then it's going to make it a lot more clean for us being able to understand, are we agreeing and working to the procedure we say or not? We shouldn't forget, I think we all agree we decided that last time, right?
Thank you, Glenn. Liz, do you have anything that you'd like to mention? Just an opportunity. Lisa?
Yeah, so I took an earlier comment that Favi made to mean that we will get to create our own procedures for how this works, our community engagement and how we work together. Because when you held up that page, you said, you got to remember, this is the one for Phoenix, and that different projects might have different processes. So I took that to mean that, this group could have their own customized way of working and community outreach. Maybe I was just wishing that.
Yeah, that's not what I intended.
It sounded really good. That's what I'd like to do.
What I meant and clarify is that this is the current process for Phoenix. And sometimes, depending on project, this will vary. And there could be more outreach and there could be less. And that's what I wanted.
Okay.
Carlos.
Yes, I just wanted to emphasize the need for the matrix that follows and tracks the recommendations of the select committee and to understand what they are, what the status is, because I think that should be the part of our work plan here, in addition to the whatever new comes up, but certainly following up on all the work that was done before and understanding where it's at in the process is very important to us, I think.
Agreed. Thank you. Michelle. Welcome. I didn't get a chance to say hi. Hi, Ed.
Hi, just real quick. I want to take off on a point that the chair mentioned earlier, and that is she acknowledged, or I want to acknowledge that without the FAA being here, we wouldn't have a committee. So it's everything we're going to get, if it doesn't seem like we're getting all we want, without them being here. And I know, Diane, you were acknowledged for what you do and what you contribute. I just want to acknowledge Bert and Fabi for both being here also, because when the questions come, I didn't hear you talk today, Bert, but I know that when it turns on you, you'll have answers for us. So I just appreciate you all being here and being open and continuing this process. Thank you.
And I wanted to thank you also, Bert. I warned you that maybe we could get you to chime in on noise, but we'll hold off for another time. I think you know a little bit about noise. Also, I'd also like to emphasize that we are able to have cross-communication now, effective as it may or may not be in your eyes. Once a lawsuit occurs, the FAA will shut down on that subject. We will not be able to have that kind of conversation within the committee if it does affect a city that is sitting here. So I think it's something that we all should be aware of and appreciative of the communications we are getting. There are guidelines that we would like to impose on the FAA, and there are certain standards that the FAA has to abide by also. So it is a give and take, and it can be very frustrating, but reasons that I want to do a strategic plan, and also I want the matrix and all the things that we are talking here will be points at which we can succeed in going forward. And not the least, Kathy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have a request. I brought it up earlier, like in a previous meeting, but I understand the city of Santa Clara entered into an agreement with San Jose Airport sometime in the last 10 years, and it involved, I guess, the residents of North Santa Clara and impacts, in the community. And the gentleman that spoke earlier alluded to, some of the, how the airport has impacted the residents in North Santa Clara. So I've asked our staff to, for a copy of the agreement, and nobody can put their hands on it. And since San Jose isn't here that I can ask them for a copy of it, I just want to, it would be nice to see a copy of it and just make sure that, the agreement is in compliance and just ensure compliance. And also, with procedures changing, I don't know if procedures were part of the agreement, and with talking about Loop 5 today, just things like that to make sure that, that things are just, that it's just in compliance. So it would just be nice to be able to follow up, and since it did impact the city of Santa Clara. Thank you. That's all.
There's a rule in the city of Saratoga that you shouldn't be on your cell phones when you're in a meeting. That is not always followed. And I have broken that rule just now, but I do have something that I would like to announce. I mentioned that I had been in touch with with Matt Kaczmarek earlier this morning, and he did get back to me. For you, he said he was happy to see and be able to distribute the response from the FAA that had to do with South Flow. My director is currently on travel, but let me share with him the report and the request for a meeting. I myself am always happy to talk with you on the phone or meet with you in person to touch base. So we are trying to move forward so that maybe the airport will represent us someday, or at least appear here at some point when we are talking about items that do include them. So that ends my part. I have more than enough from all of you that I don't feel that I need to do anything more, and I appreciate all of your suggestions. Steve, it's now your time to do a rapid.
There were no actions taken.
No actions taken, but we have a lot of suggestions.
We do have many suggestions.
Yes. So I am going to adjourn the meeting with the idea, the reminder that on June 22nd, Wednesday, we will be meeting in Santa Cruz County at the Board of Supervisors. We will get that address out to you, and Andy is usually wonderful about supplying directions along with that. So again, I thank you all. I don't know that we will continue to be meeting monthly throughout the year. The budget may run out before that happens, so we may be getting breaks, but right now it is on for monthly, and I thank you all for attending today.